When I was growing up, there was an old man in my parish named Reuben Scarf, whose faith and character and life were just so inspiring. And he often took time to kind of teach me as a teenager little bits of his wisdom and little explanations of his faith, most of which I've forgotten now, but I remember the feeling of being so inspired by him. But the one thing I remember still to this day was a little phrase he taught me, which was sow an act, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. I'll say that again. Sow an act, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. And even though talk of reaping a destiny might sound a bit like a Disney movie, there's something quite profound, I think, which has always stayed with me, that the single actions I do today can build into the habits which define me and my character, and indeed what my life will be on about. And that's something which I want to explore today through the lens of the leper whom we meet in the gospel. It's a very familiar gospel story, I'm sure, where Jesus heals 10 people, and one, the Samaritan, comes back to say thank you to Jesus. And Jesus notes this man's faith, he praises this man's faith to others. And the lesson we learn, which of course is that we too should be grateful as this man was grateful. It's a good, inspiring story for all of us. But how do we get to be grateful like this leper was? I don't think this would have been the first time this man said thanks. I suspect that this man, this leper who clearly suffered a lot, had been a person who took note of small things and was grateful and said thank you throughout his life. That when he became sick with leprosy, he continued to find in the midst of suffering ways to be grateful and to keep up hope in small things, so that when the time came that he received the biggest blessing of his life, this healing from Jesus, his response was gratitude. Not anger for how long it took him to be healed or how long he'd suffered for, but gratitude that led him straight back to Jesus when 9 other people did not have the same response. And that deeper encounter with Jesus personally, we hear Jesus then praise the man and say, well done, your faith has saved you. A deeply beautiful personal encounter this man got to have with Jesus. And I think that's the lesson we can learn, is that we have to build up those habits by those individual actions. This week, one of our beautiful parishioners, Josie Scully, died, and she died very peacefully. 2 months ago, when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I visited her in hospital, and she said, I've had a great life, and I know where I'm going, so I'm quite okay with moving into palliative care now, rather than trying to have interventions and treatments to try to sustain my life a little bit longer. And that just certainty, that peacefulness she had, that confidence she had in where she was going, sustained her all the way through to her death. Her sister said that it never left in the last 2 months. Josie's response, I've had a great life and I am grateful. She didn't have an easy life necessarily. That great life included an earlier bout with cancer, which she'd gotten through, her husband dying, and indeed one of her children dying. Not an easy life by any measure, but yet she was able to build up that gratitude. And I suspect that Josie, throughout her life, was a person who was grateful for the many small things. And when tragedies and suffering came, she didn't lament those and didn't make those the centre of her life. She continued to find what was good and to be grateful, so that her character was that she was a thankful person, a grateful woman. So when the time came the end of her life to define herself, she could say, I am grateful, and I've had a great life, and I know where I am going. And so I'm so inspired by Josie and the way she lived the last few months of her life, that I think, how can I and how can we learn from her? And I think it is about that little steps of phrases that Reuben Scarf taught me. It's the actions that lead to the habits that lead to the character that lead to the destiny. So how do we do that? Well, I think it starts with individual actions of gratitude, of saying thank you, just as we teach children to say please and thank you when they're young, and we hope that they'll learn to embed that as a habit, that they'll continue to say thank you when good things happen. And over time, we learn that response of gratitude becomes innate, that we feel a sense of warmth. We feel gratitude towards those who've done good to us. But over time, hopefully our gratitude expands beyond just the person standing in front of us who's done a good deed, to a gratitude to the wider world, to all those people who I cannot see, but in some way have contributed to my well-being. And doing so, I can give thanks to God for all of them. And I think one of the great ways to do this is the practice of saying grace before meals, which I know some people do, but many people don't. And fewer, I think, do it out loud or in public. But to say grace, myself to God, if I'm on my own, but out loud with others, is a way of both being grateful and expressing it, but building the awareness. Building the awareness that the meal that I have in front of me was not all my own doing. It builds a sense of gratitude for farmers and for the work they do, the toil they do in harsh seasons of bad weather that bring us that produce our food. It may include even gratitude towards the animals whose lives became part of my meal. It includes gratitude towards those who drove trucks to bring food overnight, the people who were away from their family and friends and lost night's sleep to bring food to a supermarket where I can access food so easily. And every person, every factory and supermarket and step along the way, that I can give thanks for all of those. But they are all part of my story. They are all part of my well-being. And so my prayer of thanks to God includes all of that. My prayer of thanks might also acknowledge the many people who do not have a good meal to eat each and every day, and to pray that things would change for them, that God's justice would take root in the world for them to also have a meal every day. So for us, in saying grace, it simply builds that habit. Another great way of building that habit and that attitude of gratitude is to do the examine at the end of a day, to reflect upon my day, to take note of what has been good, where have I felt goodness, whether at the time or in hindsight. So I might give thanks to God for all the good in my life. I also acknowledge the bad and the struggles, but not to let those define me. Instead, to define my character by gratitude for all that has been good. And in doing so, we become like Josie. So when at some time at the end of our life we might be asked to make a decision and account for ourselves at how we've lived, we might have those words and that attitude of gratitude on the tips of our tongues and on our lips, that we've had a great life for which we are indeed grateful.